So good evening, everyone. So Marshall said that I was given transmission by Zen Master Bon Soeng. What he didn't say is I was given transmission by Zen Master Bon Soeng on April 15th, 2001. So if you take the international dateline into account, today is actually my anniversary day for my transmission. So I suppose coupling that with my age and my place in life, I've been looking at the arc of my life in Zen, what led me to Zen, where I've gotten to, and actually what I think is most important about Zen. And I was a little afraid might be a good word of setting the talk this way, because what I don't want to do right now is to make some definitive statement on what I've learned, what Zen teaching is for me, what the most important things are. But I think where I am right now actually is this is going to be a little bit more of a sketch, just an exploration and a sense of what's important to me. But maybe to give the talk a little bit of color, let me just go back 20 years. In 2001, for those of us in the United States, it was pre-September 11th, so we had no idea of what was to come. But Zen Master Bon Soeng in 2001, he had been sick for a few years. And by the time 2001 came around, he wasn't traveling anymore. Every other transmission ceremony that had happened in the United States, or for the Western teachers, had happened in the United States at the Providence Zen Center. But it was pretty clear, probably 6 months or so before the ceremony, that Zen Master Bon Soeng was not traveling anymore. He was staying put in Korea. So the ceremony got changed to being done at Musangsa in Korea, which at that time was our very new temple that we had created in Korea. And actually there are many reasons for establishing that temple, but one of the main ones was actually that the Quantum School of Zen, we exist within Korean Buddhism, but we're actually a little bit different. And Zen Master Bon Soeng, in his traveling to the West, he changed certain things. So he was afraid that when he died, if we didn't have an independent place, I suppose you'd say, in Korea, that we would be subsumed into Korean Buddhism, into the Choge order specifically. So this land in Korea was found, and it was found in what in Korea they think of as a power spot. In Korean geomancy, in power spots, there are mountains behind, and there is water in front, and then also some more mountains. And actually, where Oakland sits in the Bay Area, in many ways represents that power spot for the Bay Area. In Korean geomancy, the power spot is not up at the top of the mountain. It's about a third of the way up. And in Oakland, where I live especially, there are mountains to the east, there's the bay and then the ocean to the west, and then the coastal mountain range. So it very much is that same kind of power spot. And the whole San Francisco Bay Area does have some of that feeling. We are in many ways an engine for California, for the United States, and in some ways for the world. Often it's easy for us to think in narrow, small chunks, and we sometimes miss the grand movements of things and how place and moment in time matters very much. So just to finish this piece off about Korea, so I traveled to Korea. The first thing that happened, this is just kind of a funny story, maybe I'm indulging a little bit, but about 2 months before the ceremony, I got this telephone call, and it was from one of the teachers in Korea who called me up to apologize that he had to say this to me. But Zen Master Sung-san decided that since the ceremony was in Korea, my hair was a bit too long. And he asked if I would please cut it. And what he said was, just cut it above your ears. Now, when I first joined the Quantum School of Zen, my hair went about halfway down my back. It was pretty curled and I wore it in a ponytail. So mostly nobody could tell. And my beard was probably about down to here, probably about twice to maybe 3 times as long as I keep it now. And before I entered the Sangha, Zen Master Sung-san had already told a lot of people to cut their hair. But for some strange reason, he never told me to do that. He never asked me to do that, which was probably good. And maybe he knew that. With me, it wasn't going to be the best move. But finally, he had his chance on my transmission ceremony. So the first call was to just cut my hair above my ears. And I wasn't going to complain. I said, okay, no problem. And then about a week later, I got a second call. This call was from Jito Popsanim at the time named Mushim Sanim, who was Zen Master Sung-san's secretary. Later on, he actually became a Zen Master Daejin, who ultimately died of leukemia, I don't know, about somewhere around 10 years ago. But Mushim Sanim called me up again. He said, well, I got further instructions from Zen Master Sung-san, and actually he doesn't want you to cut your hair above your ears. He wants you to take a razor and do a buzz cut. He said, don't shave your head, but just cut it short. And then he said, please leave your beard, because in Korea, someone with short hair or a shaved head and a beard is thought of as a bodhisattva. So that image was going to be good. So now we're getting much closer to the ceremony, and I thought, well, I'm not going to argue about this. I'm not going to fight it. I'm just going to do it. It was actually quite a good practice for me, because it was a kind of preparation for the ceremony and maybe in some ways a little bit of a submission. But what's interesting, to me at least, is that I still have this hairstyle. Nobody said keep it. I kept it. And I kept it because it was pleasing to me. But I think as I'm telling the story, the important piece of the story in terms of teaching is that we don't always know how things will turn out. And we have our likes and dislikes, and we follow them. But sometimes when we are forced to not follow our likes and dislikes, we actually find a new like or dislike, or maybe just a better way. So without Zen Master Sung-san sticking his nose into my hairstyle, I might never have come to this style. And yet, for the last 20 years, somehow or other, I decided to keep it. So it wasn't original preference, and it didn't much have to do with me. And yet, did it have a lot to do with me? And now as I'm telling this story, I don't even really know Zen Master Sung-san's motivation. I know what was told to me. But maybe it was a final challenge. Maybe if I had responded differently, everything would have turned out quite differently. This not knowing, this being open to something new is for me at least, is at the heart of Zen practice. And very often I know my own resistance to whatever it is that's new. I can often hear my first response being no. But I've learned over time that sometimes no is just my first gate. I've got to get past the first gate to open up into what I don't know. So my ceremony in Korea, I had the great fortune of not being the only Zen master being given transmission that day. The other Zen master who was given transmission that day was Zen Master Daquan, who is a Sunim, we would call a nun. She lives in Hong Kong and she runs our Zen center in Hong Kong. And she and I did the ceremony together. And again, the happenstance of that meant that it wasn't such a as much of a big deal for people from Hong Kong to come to Korea. So she brought with her a whole group of her students. And there were, I don't think anybody came from Empty Gate, but there were some of the other teachers came from around the United States to the ceremony. I don't think anybody here on this talk, Tina Sheridan, my wife is on this talk, she was there. And the joy of having them come to Korea meant that once the ceremony was over, we took a temple tour of Korea, that we were all on a bus and we traveled around Korea. And this time of year I guess it's not so early into spring, but the cherry blossoms are all in bloom. And we spent days going from one temple to the next where the bus would park and then we would walk up these pathways with cherry blossom ceilings on them. And the cherry blossoms would be snowing on us as we walked through. And then you'd pass the gate of the temple and this magnificent Korean temple would open up in front of us. And of course, by the time we did the tour, the ceremony was over. So it was quite pleasant. And all of the whatever anxiety and fear about having to do the public Dharma combat, present myself, get my new Dharma name, all that was over. And now it was just the fruit of our labor. And I think in part, I am saying this part of the talk to entice you all a little bit, to be a little bit curious about Korea, to be curious about the temples in Korea, and to encourage you to take the opportunity, which, assuming we get out of this pandemic, which will be arising in the fall of 2023, where the Quantum School will be having our whole world as a single flower in Korea, in which time I'm sure after or during the ceremony, there will be again this lovely tour of the temples of Korea. So I'm planting a seed for you all. Know that this trip is coming. And having been on many of these trips, it's quite a Sangha experience. You get to be with our Sangha, which is really worldwide. And you get to live, practice, eat, and travel with a group of like-minded Zen students, which ends up feeling like a large family. It's quite a thing. So I'm planting that seed in all of your minds, the possibility of being in Korea in the fall of 2023. So I want to say a few words. Last week, we had our Dharma talk the day before what we consider Buddha's birthday. And there was no mention of it, which I thought was quite interesting. It shows how unceremonial we actually are. In Korea, they actually celebrate Buddha's birthday and Buddha's Enlightenment Day at the same time, where in the West, we've got them split, and it's called Vesak Day. And in Korea, they spend months preparing for this day by building by hand paper lanterns and hanging them in the temples. And so it's this big deal that gets created in the lead up to Buddha's birthday. And in America, we didn't even mention it. So in thinking about this, I'm remembering the talk I gave in April a year ago, which I referenced Buddha's birthday and the story of the Buddha. And the interesting point, I don't think I'm going to get into the whole story tonight, but I want to reiterate the interesting point that I thought came out of the talk a year ago. The timing of our talk last year was very soon after what I'm going to call the murder of George Floyd, and the racial tension in our country and the demonstrations, and the energy was quite large right now. Interestingly enough, the trial, of course, of the policeman who I will say murdered him is happening right now. But as I was giving that talk, I was expressing that the story always bothered me, because just the outline of the story is that when the Buddha was born, his father was the ruler of this small kingdom in what we now call India. And his father, just like most fathers, wanted his son to succeed him, in this case, to become king and to rule the kingdom. When he was born, there was a prophecy that either he was going to be a great political leader or a great spiritual leader. Well, his father really wanted him to be the political leader, had no interest at all in him being the spiritual leader. So he devised a plot. He was going to keep his son sequestered, if you will, and keep away from him anything that would stimulate his spiritual self, if you will, or his spiritual part. So what it ended up being, that what got hidden from him was poverty, sickness, old age, and death. In Buddhism, they're called the four heavenly messengers. That if we take these things in, poverty, sickness, old age, and death, those four heavenly messengers might stimulate our spiritual side, make us realize the connection that we have to this universe, to call into question the separate sense that we have of ourselves, that I'm here and you all are there. So basically, in my way of thinking about it, especially as a 21-year-old who for the first time was learning the story of the Buddha, the way I understood it is that the Buddha's father lied to him. And I compared that to my growing up, where I felt society lied to us, or to me, that to become acculturated in a society meant to cut off who we were to become something we were supposed to be. Now remember, I was 15 years old in 1968. So at that time, the world around me was bubbling with change, with new ways of looking at things, with violence, with a war going on that I was threatened to be sent to, and with the civil rights movement in high gear, and the obvious unequal treatment of human beings. But our society, we talked about it, but there was a denial. So I could relate to this sense, just like the Buddha was lied to. I felt like going through the educational system and being socialized into being a quote unquote good citizen, that I was also being lied to. And from probably the time I was about 15, I was determined to find something real, something for me that felt authentic, that a life that I didn't have to fit into but a life that I could live that was genuinely my own, by my choice, lived in a way that suited my sense of reality. So a little bit of I'm on two tracks here, but I want to get back to the track of the Buddha's story. As I was talking about the Buddha's birth and his early life last year, what came to me was, like I said, there was something off about the Buddha's story. First of all, his mother died, I think it was 7 days after childbirth, maybe it was 10. I mean, let's leave out the fact that supposedly he jumped out of his mother's hip rather than through her vagina, which is the way most of us were born. But leaving that aside, he already knew death. He already knew loss. It was in his bones. As an infant, his mother was gone. So how do you fool somebody into thinking that there's no life, that there is no death? It doesn't make sense. So it always bothered me. But then last year, I realized the Buddha's father didn't actually have to lie to him. All he had to do was pamper him. All he had to do was put him into the velvet cage of privilege. Everything was for Shakyamuni. Or if you put ourselves in that situation, everything was for me. No thought of you. The whole life of the palace was about pampering this boy and giving him what he wanted and taking care of him and making sure that he didn't know any of those heavenly messengers of poverty, sickness, old age, and death. So once the Buddha came in contact with those 4 heavenly messengers, the velvet cage of his privilege exploded. And suddenly he realized the lie he had been living. And he realized that other humans suffered. They really kept the fact of suffering away from him. Now, that's preposterous. But in his privilege, he didn't have to care. And I know for myself, there are remnants of my own privilege that stop me from caring. So I guess I want to say pretty strongly that each one of us, whatever our ethnicity, whatever our sexual orientation, it doesn't matter. All of us have some privilege, even if it's just, I mean, for all of us here, you can't tell I'm picking up my computer, but each one of us can have a computer. Otherwise, you couldn't be here tonight. That's privilege. So I want to encourage all of us, pay attention to our privilege. Even those of us who feel like we're not in the privileged class. And believe me, I understand there are distinctions. I'm a cis white male who is able to afford a computer, whose father, though grew up very poor, got the benefits of the GI Bill, was able to go to college, was able to succeed in life. His race didn't stand in his way. And fortunately for him, even his religion, by the time he was really an adult working, even his Jewish religion didn't get in his way. Had he tried to make his way 30 years before, it would have been quite different. Each one of us has our own privilege. And inasmuch as that privilege is unexamined, we don't see what we don't care about. So I want to encourage all of us, myself certainly included, to keep looking for privilege. Keep looking for those ways that our position in life put us to sleep and we miss the suffering of this world. So, but for me, as that 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18, 19, 20, all the way through college, the clarity of the suffering of the world was so apparent to me. And for me, the tragedy that we as human beings were forced into boxes. You know, in Zen, we talk about the true self and the false self. The false self grows from the causes and conditions in our life. The bars, the prison that our spirit gets locked into in order to survive in society. Well, for me, there was this 7-year period where I was able to stake out some freedom. I was actually privileged enough that I could walk away and look for something else. And I think one of the reasons I'm talking about this is because I can see my life as this journey of exploration and looking for authenticity and being real. And I think one of the things that attracts me to Zen, but also makes it difficult for us, is that in Zen, we don't really tell people how to be. We offer a practice, but we don't say you should be this, 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 and this. Many religions tell you, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do that, and you will have a happy life. But that's not actually what Zen's about. Zen is about opening us up and allowing each one of us to find our way. So when I think of Zen teaching, in some ways it would be easier to just say, do good things. Always be nice to people. Never get angry. Never allow your mind to incline toward anger. But that wouldn't be real. That might have a nice veneer, but it's not real. The other day in one of our smaller practices, Dennis mentioned the documentary on Ernest Hemingway. And I had just started watching it. And there was something he said or he wrote that was read that really struck me. When he was talking about writing, he said, what I'm trying to get across is what's real. And to get across what's real, you can't only give what's pretty. You can't only show the nice stuff that we like and that we want. You have to show the horror. You have to show the indignity. You have to show the blood and the guts. And I think that's actually quite Zen. We're not trying to paint a veneer of something good or nice or perfect. For me, what Zen is about is becoming alive right now. I think for me, it really reduces to how do I show up in this very moment? And in this very moment, how do I reveal myself? Or how does nature get revealed through me? I'm not trying to be too clear, too precise in the language, but I'm trying to encourage all of us is to use practice to strip away the veneer of good and bad, right and wrong. And then let the moment show us how to be. So I think what I've come down to for myself, and I'm sure you've all been listening to me talk most weeks of this year, you've heard this in one form or another. Be present right now without holding your idea, but use great doubt to open the moment and then perceive clearly And as we're doing that, step into the moment and, in a sense, burn ourselves up completely in the moment. Fully engage, fully be alive. Now, that's easy to say. That's a tall order. Notice all the ways we hold back to protect ourselves. And in a way, having somebody tell you how to live is a good way to protect yourself, because then you don't take the risk. If I know I'm always supposed to be nice, and I think being nice means this kind of superficial, I'm slanting what I'm saying, so be careful. But this kind of niceness that isn't real, authentic, even that needs to be stripped away. But if we can keep the bodhisattva ideal as a direction, how can I help this moment? For me, very simply, I don't say this each moment, but no matter what I'm doing, my intention, at least, I'm not always successful, but my intention is to make this moment better for all of us. It's about not coming into the moment with, what can I get out of this moment to serve me? But how can we all be enhanced? And not only we, the human beings in this room, but the plants, the animals, the air, the water. How in each moment can we participate in a way that brings, it's almost hokey to say it this way, peace and love and compassion and wisdom into the world. Remember, there was an Elvis Costello song many years ago where the chorus went, "What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?" I grew up in the hippie age, and it's so easy to mock and to caricature and to make it sound silly. And in many ways, there's a lot of silliness to it. And yet, at its very core, what is funny about caring about other people? Why is it so odd to really look at the world and think it is possible for people to be peaceful and to care about each other and to share? But again, it's not some superficial two-dimensional fantasy. It's a living, breathing, bubbling cauldron of life. You know, I don't really understand this, but what I've learned and heard about the understanding in quantum physics is that even in a vacuum, there's this firing of matter and antimatter. There's the potentiality of life always present. And to me, that's Zen life. To walk into that potentiality, to allow to be part of that potentiality, to not know how it's going to work out, but to offer up the energy and the moment that time and space allows. So rather than teaching how to be an enlightened person, which I don't even like that construct, it's more, what path do I take to get there? And when I'm here in this moment, how do I show it? What am I doing? Sometimes it's a Dharma talk on a Wednesday night. Sometimes it's picking up a piece of plastic on the pathway to my house. And sometimes when I'm walking on that pathway to my house and I see that little piece of plastic, I think, I don't feel like getting it right now. And honestly, sometimes I don't. But very often I hear that phrase in my head, I don't feel like it. And that's a signal to turn around, pick it up, and throw it in the trash. So as usual, I've gone longer than I expected, but I'm going to end with one story. One of my favorite Zen teachings, if you will. Actually, that brings up a few of them, but I'm going to stick with the one I have. And this is a very simple story that I've heard about Dogen Zenji, the founder of the Soto school of Japanese Zen. And basically, it's very simple. He got his water from the creek or from the river, and he had this dipper. So he'd go to the river and he'd dip in, and then he would pour half of it back, and then he would drink. Just that mind. That mind includes everything. First of all, he was taking care of himself. He needed water, so he went and got it. It wasn't such a self-sacrificial practice that he wouldn't drink, but he was aware of the rest of the universe, so he poured half of it back. And to be alive enough in the moment to remember, that's our way. And everything we do in practice, it's not to be a particular kind of person. You don't have to become like me. Your job is to become your true nature. And when I say your true nature, it's this funny combination of each of our incarnations. We're born at a particular moment in time, in a particular place, in a particular neighborhood, surrounded by particular customs and beliefs and ideas. Through that constellation, true nature animates. So take who you are, your time-space constellation. Allow the authentic nature of this universe to move you, and then act. Not the way you think you're supposed to do it, but how the moment shows you. So you have to listen. You have to pay attention, not be bullheaded and just act out of your own idea, but take in your surroundings. Let this moment be your teacher, and then do it. And then learn from your experience. So out of the activity of compassion and action, we can develop wisdom. And that wisdom can help us as we're on our journey. So I first meditated when I was 14 years old. So that's over 50 years ago. It's been a whole journey, not towards a particular destination, but towards tonight. The arc of our lives lead us to right now. And if we can find that authentic nature that has been flowing through that arc, it is possible for us to open and to offer. Some people will like it, some people won't like it. You might fall on your face, you might get great praise. Generally, we prefer the great praise to falling on our faces. But often falling on our faces is really the way we learn. Praise works because it helps a little bit because it satisfies that insecurity. But it's really, my experience of it is that it's quite fleeting. We want praise. We want to be seen as this wonderful being. But we know who we are. We know what we're struggling with. Be honest with yourself. Use your practice to open, not to make yourself some fantasy person, but let your practice open you so you're raw and you're real. And use the Bodhisattva path as a map, as a way of keeping you moving forward. And then just do it. And if you do that, my belief, my sense of reality is that the whole universe is enhanced. You'll notice if you live that way, the people around you will be a little happier. You may or may not be, but notice how it is around you. You know, if you think Buddhism, practicing Zen is about becoming happy, happiness is also fleeting. Happiness is wonderful. I know that, you know that. But if you don't have sadness, there is no happiness. So, like Hemingway said, we have to include all of it to really be in reality. So step into it. Both the beautiful smell of the flowers and the smell of the dog shit that we may not like as much. And sometimes you step right in it. So then what? That's our life. If you always are trying to avoid stepping in it, you become very ginger in your behavior. When my nephew was in college, he joined the Buddhist club and he stayed there for about a week or two. And he said, everybody is living their life as if they're walking on eggshells. That's not Zen. Remember, in America, our forebears practicing Zen were the beats, were the people who were trying to find something new and alive in this world. Being a Zen practitioner is a radical activity. Embrace it, live it, and that's how we help this world. Thank you all very much.